All right, next up we have Living the Dream asks, I'm the database administrator for a medium-sized city. We're dealing with a ransomware attack, and every 3 days our account and password gets reset based on different security vendors. Do you have any suggestions for handling a outage like that? Nope. I don't do any security work whatsoever. It's actually, I hate security consulting so much because it's so dangerous, right? You're totally at the risk of getting your rear end sued off. It is so dangerous that I actually prohibit it in my contract. My contract says you're not allowed to hire me for security stuff. You're not allowed to hire me, ask me security questions. And it's not that I don't think security is important. It's just so ridiculously risky from a consulting perspective. Early on in my consulting career, I had a client who, as soon as I looked at their systems, I'm like, look, you are ripe for a hack. You're doing these 3 things that are incredibly dangerous. Someone is going to hack you. It's a matter of time. And then, sure enough, but before the time where our engagement was over, they were actually hacked. And it was very nice to be able to show them the written findings and say, here, look, I warned you about this, and I told you to go hire a security firm immediately, but I am not going to be that security firm. That's, God, gross. Next, a high voted question is, what's the closest you've come? Oh, let me swipe this over here. TikTok's telling me that there's questions. Let's see here from TikTok. DB asks, hi Brent, I'm using SQL Server 2019 on premises and I feel that the quality of cumulative updates has been lowered over the years. You're not imagining things. So back when Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, Satya Nadella actually disbanded most quality assurance teams. And Satya and that realm of management said it's the developer's responsibility to test their own software. Now that sounds great in theory. In theory, yes, sure, developers should be responsible for testing their own software. But back here in reality, quality assurance teams play a very valid role, especially for big, massive enterprise type apps like SQL Server that have tons of legacy code in them. So you're not imagining things. The quality of cumulative updates has gone down by quite a lot. Next up, the People's Elbow over on PolGab asks, what's the closest you have come to getting violent with a database server? I'll tell you a true story. So I was working, this is more than 20 years ago. I think, a little less than 20 years ago. I was working as a DBA for a company in South Florida, and I needed to make space in a rack, not the country, but the physical things that you slide servers into. I needed to make space, and so I was playing a game of Tetris trying to move servers around to fit in a couple of new database servers that we have come in. And in order to make it work, I had to take a big 4U server. 4U servers weigh, depending on the day and age, 50 to 100 pounds. I think this one probably weighed 50. I had to take it out of the rack and then move it over my head to the very top space in the rack. Turned down for what? And I was working by myself in the middle of the night in this company's data center, and I go to put the thing over my head, and you can kind of see by my arms. I am not a strong guy in any way, shape, or form. And sure enough, I couldn't hold the server just right and get it into the little rack rails, and it dropped and fell to the floor. It missed my feet by maybe an inch. The pointy end of it, the whole thing, and we had raised floor tiles, and it shattered the floor tile. This is an IBM server, and God bless them, they build these amazingly reliable servers. So this IBM server, it actually still booted afterwards, but it shattered the floor tile, came, this close to shattering my foot. My heart was going 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I just tried to calm down. I walked around the data center. I put the server back in a really low spot, and I went home for the night, and I never did anything like that again. So that was pretty bananas. Let's see here, content disclosure, my own brand. TikTok has given me flack saying that I needed to warn them that I'm promoting my own brand. I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. Over on TikTok, let's see here. Addie Fentan says, "Hi Brent, how do I learn Azure duties for a DBA role?" Let me get that camera back up in a normal position. Wow, this thing's really struggling trying to keep my camera up. Kind of weird how that works. Let's try that. Addie says, hi Brent, how do I learn Azure duties for a DBA role? So if you have this is kind of a tricky answer. If you already have the DBA role, then your company is probably transitioning into Azure. And in that case, you're going to learn along with the rest of the staff. If you don't have the job yet, and you're trying to get experience in Azure without having the job, honestly, you're not going to be able to do it very well, because having a job without or having Azure experience means spending money on Azure. Now you can go work on passing the Azure certificates, which is just a matter of studying, but then you need to be really clear with the company that, look, I have the certificates, but I don't really have the hands-on experience myself. If the other thing that I would ask you is, what do you think you need it for? Because it's a relative minority of companies that are going to require hands-on Azure experience from their DBAs, just because it's such a I say relatively new. I mean, I'm sure Azure's been out for a really long time, but it's hard to find people in the market with experience. If you have solid database administrator experience, you're going to find that that's going to be good enough to get you across the finish line, rather than also having Azure in there. All right, let's see. Next up from PolGab, Vishnu asks, I suspect that we have unreported SQL Server instances running on premises and in Azure, but I'm not sure where they're located. What tool do you like to use for scanning for Azure or for unreported SQL Server instances? Me personally, I like using the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit. If you search for Microsoft Assessment Planning Toolkit, it's this command line utility that will go through and sweep your network, and it also looks at Active Directory too, which makes it much easier, because a lot of times people have telltale signs in Active Directory where the servers live. It can also look at the registry and all kinds of other stuff. So that's the one that I would start with. Next up, Hal asks, is there demand for a Postgres version of ConstantCare? You know, I haven't asked, but my hunch is no. The Postgres industry tends to be more focused on free stuff. I will say that there is definitely demand for a Postgres version of the First Responder kit. And yes, absolutely, I am working on that. Over on TikTok, Stefanos asks, hi Brent, is there any automation for testing restores reading the files from disk? As a matter of fact, yes, speaking of the open source First Responder kit. So if you go to brentozar.com and you click tools up at the top, there is a First Responder kit that we manage, and one of the pieces in there is called SP Database Restore. And if you're using Ola Hallgren's maintenance scripts for your backups, it'll automatically, all you have to do is point it at a folder for the fulls, diffs, and logs, and it'll automatically restore the most recent full, restore the most recent diff, restore the most recent log. It can run CheckDB on there if you want, tell you if there are errors. It can run custom stored procedures if there's a stored proc that you use internally for testing. All kinds of stuff that it does. Totally open source. We don't charge a dime for that. It was originally written by Tara Kaiser, if I remember right. So yeah, there you go. Next up, let's see here. IRDBA says, hi Brent, I have a table with 40 to 50 million rows, and doing a reorg takes much longer than a rebuild. I've changed my index optimized job to rebuild and I don't reorg anymore. Yeah, reorg is not the fast way to do it. Reorg is the slow way to do it. The benefit of reorgs is that they can be interrupted and then resumed at any time, but they are very slow. It is not a fast operation there, assuming that you've got any level of fragmentation. So I assume that answers your question. If not, can you form it in the form of a question, and then we'll go from there. Next up, Lucy MacLean. I get the Fallout reference. That was pretty good. Lucy MacLean. I adored the Fallout TV show. I had just absolutely adored that. So Lucy MacLean asks, will the Crowdstrike issue cause shops to ditch their SQL Server VMs and move towards managed instances of SQL Server, like either Azure SQL Managed Instances, Amazon RDS, Azure SQL DB, or so forth? I don't think so. I don't think that's going to be the case because switching over to cloud-based platforms has its own gotchas and expenses. It's not the kind of thing that people take very casually. I think lots of things in the industry can cause people to move towards that, but I don't think it's going to be something that's that rapid fire. I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference. I'll tell you, right after it first happened, when I did a TikTok about it, talking about the problems with CrowdStrike, and somebody in the chat said, "Oh, CrowdStrike is screwed as a company. They're just going to absolutely disappear." And I'm like, I don't think so, because you remember SolarWinds. SolarWinds had that big, massive supply chain attack where when SolarWinds got hacked, lots of government agencies also got hacked because of the SolarWinds weakness. People were going like, SolarWinds is dead, you know, they're never gonna. No, when you have a company that sells into enterprises like that, it takes enterprises a really long time before they change their purchasing decisions. Over in TikTok, Addie asks, is Ola's maintenance plan your recommendation or any other? Yeah, so the way that I think about it is if a database administrator can't code T-SQL, either because they don't have the time or they don't have the inclination, and there are a lot of people out there like that who are either sysadmins and like databases is their part-time job. If you can't code T-SQL or won't code T-SQL, then stick with maintenance plans. They're built into the SQL Server engine. But if you can and do code T-SQL, then you should probably switch over to Ola Hallgren's maintenance scripts. They're totally free, they're open source. And those of you who've used Ola Hallgren's maintenance scripts might be saying, well, Brent, I don't need to code T-SQL with them. Yeah, but you do need to troubleshoot sometimes. Ola scripts have bugs. They're not perfect. If you go to the GitHub repo for it, you'll see hundreds of reported bugs and issues. So you just have to be able to get your way past those bugs from time to time. And that's where the ability to code T-SQL comes in and troubleshoot T-SQL. Let's see here. Oh, Mattia asks, from Italy, if I remember right, says, there's been a lot of talk about the CrowdStrike disaster, but I can't think of a disaster recovery strategy to avoid going down except not using it, and that's not for the DBAs to say. He says, I'm thinking that it was inevitable. Am I missing something? Yes. The sysadmins at your company did not have to be on the latest and greatest CrowdStrike definitions. There was an option where they could ignore the latest version and stay one version behind. And the companies that did, it wasn't the default, but the companies who did that dodged the disaster from what I've been told. So that's one way to think about it, is you could have some machines that are on the latest and greatest builds, some machines that are on older builds. Let's see here. Next up, Cooper Howard asks, what's your opinion of SQL Server's hypothetical indexes? It's not that it's a matter of opinion. Hypothetical indexes are just used by the database engine tuning advisor temporarily during the process of tuning indexes. They're created automatically and dropped automatically. The only reason that you would see them still left behind is if someone interrupted the database engine tuning advisor or it crashed midway through. If you see them, you just need to kill them. Just get rid of them. They're not doing anything any good. Let's see, next up over in TikTok, Stefanos asks, what's the best for a SQL VM? Should you have 2 cores or 1 core, 8 gigs of RAM or 16 gigs of RAM? Well, with Microsoft SQL Server, you can either license the individual VM or license the entire host. If you license the individual VM, then the minimum number of cores that you're allowed to license is 4. Sometimes surprises people because the licenses are sold in 2-core packs, but that's just because you may buy 6, for example, and you wouldn't want to buy them in multiples of 4. So if you're licensing at the VM yourself, you got to start at least 4. If you license at the host, you're licensing with Enterprise Edition and you're running lots of VMs on that host, typically all with Microsoft SQL Server on them. Since in order to do that, Microsoft SQL Server Enterprise Edition, $7,000 US per core. In that case, typically in those large enterprises, you'll usually see 2 cores as the absolute minimum that you would do for a virtual machine. Let's see here. Next up, Addie asks, how can a DBA be better from time to time in performance monitoring and troubleshooting? Well, as it turns out, there are people who sell training classes. And if you want to learn how to get better at your job, you could buy those training classes. Endless plug, over. Next up, we have S2Ray says, where would you start if you want to start over in SQL Server database development after 9 years? So when you say start over, my first instinct is, do you think that your skills are so bad that you need to start over? If that's what you're saying, if you're like, oh my God, I didn't realize how bad my skills were, pick up a book by Itzik Ben-Gan. Itzik Ben-Gan is a brilliant T-SQL author who will absolutely blow your mind. I reread his books from time to time, and he blows my mind. Just absolutely brilliant at teaching T-SQL. If, on the other hand, you meant by starting over, if you meant you're thinking about going to another database or a different platform, start with Postgres. Postgres has the brightest feature ahead of it out of any of the databases out there. User317 says, I'm about to hit Azure SQL's 4 terabyte limit. Would you recommend attempting sharding or something else? If you're about to hit the limit, it's too late. Here's what you want to do. Go through and aggressively start dropping indexes. Make a list of your tables from largest to smallest, and the tool that you use for that is SPBlitz Index. SPBlitz Index, mode 2, sort order equals size. It's a mouthful there. SPBlitz Index, sort order equals rows, or sort order equals size, mode equals 2. And that's going to give you an inventory of all of your indexes sorted by size. Also, if you join my free membership, if you go to brentozar.com, click training up at the top, I have a free membership tier. I have a class on how to use the first responder kit. And in there, I teach you that exact technique. What you're going to find is, I guarantee you, you have tables named like sales underscore, customers underscore before the merge. You've got all kinds of extra indexes that nobody's using. Drop those indexes first. That's the first place that I'd go start. Let's see here. Next up, John asks over on TikTok, says, what's your view for running database servers on Kubernetes? It's a dead topic for Microsoft SQL Server. For Microsoft was supposed to bring out support for availability groups on Kubernetes like back in 2019. And they found out it was so hard to make it work that they dropped the feature at the last minute. They don't seem to be adding that back in either. It wasn't completed in SQL Server 2022. There's been no mention of it ever since. Postgres, it does have a little bit more legs, but because most of my consulting work is done on Microsoft, I just wouldn't have any advice for you on where to go with that. Let's see here. Oh, Rowan asks, oh yeah, Addie puts the name of the book in there, so that's perfect. Next up, over in PolGab, Jersey asks, a lot of people at my company use a subquery in the from clause instead of a where clause. Does this by itself cause performance issues? Oh, this is so tricky. So, so let's see here. Phoenix says no audio over on Twitch. Oh, that's so funny. It's muted. Well, that would do that. Let's go fix that. There we go. Oh, good. There we go. So Jersey says, a lot of people at my company are using subqueries on the from clause instead of using a where clause in the main query. Does this cause any performance issues? By itself, no, not at all. It makes no difference whatsoever. However, keep in mind that the more complex your T-SQL is, the more likely it is that you're going to hit optimization timeouts. To learn more about that, check out my Fundamentals of Query Tuning class. There we go. Let's see, another question came in over TikTok. Addie says, top 3 DBA weaknesses, thoughts? Try to give me questions that are easier to answer there. And I'm not trying to punt it, but like I have no idea what you mean by skills or lack of appetite control. You know, let's try and ask questions that will directly help your career or the problems that you're facing at work there. Let's see, next up we have Steve asks, let's see here. Steve asks, how might we explain why queries that sometimes run okay suddenly get way slower? He says the queries don't have any parameters, so we don't think that it's parameter sniffing. He says, my theory is bad plan choice. Oh, there are so many reasons queries will suddenly slow down, and I'm just going to brain dump a whole bunch of them here. Blocking, somebody else has a lock on a resource. CPU contention, you're not the only query running at the same time. Memory contention, you're not the only query running at the same time, and you can run into query workspace issues. Compilation timeouts, I could go on and on. There are a huge number of issues that will cause a query to be sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Let's see here. Oh, Moldaver. Somebody was just going through all of the Fallout names. Moldaver says, is YouTube office hours short form or long form more popular? Which ones do people like, short videos or long videos? I don't know in terms of like, I don't measure which one is more popular or less popular. I just put them both out there because some people like long videos, some people like short videos, you know, some people like bite-sized type stuff. So it's up to whichever one you want to use. I don't really care one way or another which one people use. I know me personally, I tend to watch shorter ones. I prefer TikTok all day long. I adore TikTok. I have probably an hour a day watching TikTok, either like easily half an hour to an hour just on my way to bed. I'll sit and watch it. It's absolutely fabulous. Addie says, your thoughts and observations on SQL Server 2022. I don't think it's ready yet, and I know the year is 2024, but if you Google for Brent Ozar SQL Server 2022, you'll see a long written post explaining why it's not ready yet and the problems that Microsoft continues to have with that. For my clients, I don't think that I've had maybe 5 clients so far where I've actually said, yes, you should be on 2022, and the rest we've kept on 2019. Let's see here, getting rid of a few questions here. One of the party people asks, hi Brent, I'm working on a client whose database is in managed instances. When I create a non-clustered instance or a non-clustered index on a specific table, it causes database corruption. The same index builds fine on premises. Any suggestions? Let's think about this for a second. Managed instances, you say? Managed instance. What do you suppose that name means? Managed instances. Let's think about that. I wonder if it means that they're managed by someone. I wonder if you have a problem with them. You know how Karen always asks to speak to the manager? Maybe you should speak to the manager. Wonder what that means. I guess we'll never know. Moving on to the next question. Let's see here. Ricardo asks, "Hi Brent, I've got a new customer with raw queries from..." Okay, so let me stop you right there. When you're trying to get help from someone, the best tip that I can give you is never say, "I have a client who," or "I have a customer who." Because the other people who were competing with you for that same customer are seeing you not know what you're doing, and they're saying, "Why would I help you when you probably underbid me and you didn't know what you're doing? Now you want me to fix your problem for free because you didn't know what you're doing." The answer to that is 2 characters, and yes does not fit in 2 characters. So Ricardo continues, and I'm going to answer Ricardo's question anyway. Ricardo says, "I've got a customer with raw queries from an app server that regularly run for over 10 minutes. They have no waits. When I run the query, it runs instantly." Ricardo, I'm going to show you a blog post that's going to blow your mind that I have talked about for years, and you should have heard the whole time, but you were too busy underbidding me for work, so there you go. It's called Slow in the App, Fast in SSMS. Google for Slow in the App, Fast in SSMS. And it is going to blow your mind. It's a long post. Looks like 50 pages long. It looks like it was designed by Craigslist web designer. It's absolutely giant. But the thing is sometimes you got to stop sitting around underbidding people, and you have to invest in yourself and do some education. So time to read that post. Next up, let's see here. David asks, "Why is it that there exists so little content on in-memory OLTP?" The real reason is that feature just never took off. It never did very well. It came out of the gate really just completely limited. There were so many things that it had problems with. And so by the time that Microsoft got it decently unlimited, in terms of less limited in terms of features, people had already given up and moved on. The other reason that you hardly see any adoption of it at all is that customers don't buy memory. Sounds really goofy, but to a lot of customers out there, they think 64 gigabytes is a lot of RAM. You know, and I kind of laugh because my laptop's got 64, and I can't wait for Apple to release the next MacBook Pro because I want to get 128, 192, whatever. But a lot of customers just don't use memory, and guess what you need for in-memory OLTP? Memory. Kind of sucks for that. Over in TikTok, let's see, T. Danasy asks, "What are your thoughts on Azure Managed Instances versus Azure SQL DB?" I think managed instances are the way of the future. I just have not had a single client be able to migrate over to them because of various limitations. Not necessarily even with Azure Managed Instances, just problems that clients have hit along the way. But if I was going to pick one thing for existing applications to look at moving over to, if you got multiple databases, you should be on Managed Instances. If you have a single database, you should be on Azure SQL DB. Now, I'm saying that if you're on Azure, obviously if you're on AWS, that's a whole different thing there. Let's see. Oh, this is a great question from Accidental DBA. Accidental DBA asks, "Hey Brent, is it acceptable to apply for jobs where some of the key skills are lacking, but I do have others? I find myself avoiding to applying those jobs currently. However, I'm capable and willing to learn. I'm just not sure what the protocol is." Oh, that's a great question. Apply for the job. What happens so often is that you've got some poor database person who's working their tail off, And they've been working at the company for years and they're underpaid and overworked, and they start doing everything in the shop. They do a little of this and a little of that. They've written a little Python and they work with integration services and they manage Active Directory. They're doing all kinds of things that they shouldn't be. And they get so overworked that they quit. And now the company needs to find someone to fill that job. So guess what they do? They write a job description that includes everything that person used to do. The company won't find anyone willing to do all of that who has all of that experience. So you can walk in and just go, I know these parts. If these are the parts that are the most important to you, then I'm going to be a good fit for that job. However, if these ones I don't know are the ones that are most important to you, then I won't be a good fit for that job. And the other thing that you can ask them is, hey, how many hours a week? And you go apply for the job first, but when you're doing the interviewing, say, okay, now, they always say, have you got any questions for us? Yes. Pull out their list of skills and say, okay, can you give me a rough idea? Out of, say, a 40-hour work week, how many hours would I be spending on each of these tasks? And then that will really help open things up, because they'll be like, oh, well, this one you're only going to do every 2 months, or this one's only every 3 months. So then you can be more realistic about, or feel better about the parts that you don't have experience with. And we'll do one more. G Surgeon says, I have this VM on SQL Server 2019 Enterprise. It's got 130 gigs of RAM and over 400 gigs worth of data. My memory clerks only have about 30 gigabytes worth of memory altogether. Is this normal for a busy instance that's been running for a few weeks? So there are a few things that can cause this. One of them is if the working set of data, the data that you use all the time, is actually quite small. Like maybe they have a bunch of archive tables that hardly anybody ever queries. That'll keep a SQL Server's total memory rather low, because it'll only cache the stuff that it actually needed. Another thing that can cause it is if you have external memory pressure coming from somewhere else, like if you have other things installed on that machine, on that VM, or if it's like a balloon driver that's purposely taking up memory. The way that you find out is you do CheckDB and index rebuilds. Updating statistics is another one that'll do it. Updating statistics reads a very large amount of data and hardly writes at all. So that will totally cause SQL Server's memory to blow up. If updating statistics across all the tables doesn't cause memory to blow up, then you have an issue there and something else is consuming the memory. All right, that's it for our office hours, the first hybrid office hours of both TikTok and Twitch live. It was funny about the audio stumbling block there. Glad we got past that. So thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios, y'all.